Thanks, Mubarak. Thanks for this introduction. And as Mubarak summarized quite well, as you can imagine, I'm not your typical education scholar you might be expecting today. But coincidentally, I got two research grants focusing on the different educational topics. So as Mubarak said, I'm an experimental sociologist. I mainly work on social preferences. And this is where I use my expertise, actually bringing social preferences into understanding the word of certain crises in different parts of the policy points. And education is one of those emergent areas where we tackle a different type of crises. And as one of those crises is a teacher recruitment and retention issue. And what I'm going to present today is based on an experimental project funded by Education Endowment Foundation. And the project got conducted with a collaboration between TeacherTap. I'll summarize for those who are not familiar with the company, and then the colleagues at UCL, including myself. So I was leading the experimental package where I'm going to summarize majority of the findings. So the presentation is going to be very rich in terms of results because it is actually based on 6 large-scale experiments. Today, I'm going to present only 5. And on top of quantitative findings based on experimental data, I'm going to critically reflect some of the qualitative findings based on the experimental results as well. Oops, sorry. All right. So basically, the crisis about the teacher shortage is actually a global phenomenon. Is not a national phenomenon. Okay. So according to UNESCO, for instance, the recent report, 44 million teachers needed globally by 2030 at both primary and secondary level. And in fact, 70% of this demand is at the secondary level. So you could imagine that the magnitude of the crisis is larger at the secondary level. And over half of current teachers are expected to leave the profession. This is the most grim part of that information. So we are going through this retention or recruitment crisis, whatever you name it. It basically gets exponentially bad across different countries. And in fact, when you ask school principals across the OECD countries, 22% of them cite a shortage of qualified teachers as a barrier to educational quality. That means, majority of classes, they can't find any teacher to teach it. They actually bring some non-teachers to certain classes just to compensate certain gaps. And obviously there is variation across countries in terms of tackling this kind of shortages. In the United States, for instance, this rate is slightly higher, but more prominently, if you look at these 3 countries such as France, England, and Italy, that the picture is getting a little bit more worrying. So in the UK, obviously, this project particularly focuses on the England's case. And according to the recent data we know that almost 10% of teachers, they already left the profession back in 2000 after pandemic, basically. So that was the first kind of intervention to the sector. And 36% of teachers are considering leaving in the next 12 months. So the projections the UNESCO did is based on that kind of the variables we have. And only 63% of teachers believe they will still be in teaching in 3 years of time. So as you can see that all this type of data or expected preferences already indicate that this crisis or crises will basically get worse and worse. Okay. And when we look at this initial teacher training recruitment programs as well, we also see a kind of similar picture in terms of the need and the applications there. And also 75% of senior secondary teachers, they also report recruitment difficulties. Yeah. So how we can tackle this shortage effectively? Elon Musk would probably bring this little robots to the classrooms to deal with it. And my short answer would be that would be an absolute nightmare, probably. So instead, we'll be focusing on certain areas through the literature and some discussions with stakeholders or some interviews with teachers or the head teachers. So there are certain things we could focus on to tackle this teacher retention and recruitment issue. So the first one and a well-known one, and from probably from a rational choice point of view, the most obvious one is salary improvement, right? And quite interestingly, whatever I'm going to present today, to a certain extent, as an academic, you may find quite relevant. You may relate yourself to these points because I think there are quite similarities in terms of the motivations and why we may also experience academic retention or shortages in the near future. But luckily, governments will compensate that, shutting down universities. So, almost three-quarters of teachers express concerns about their long-term pay compared to alternative career paths. And this type of expressions became more salient, especially after the pandemic. And for instance, 10,000 pounds bursaries increases linked to an 18% rise in trainees in targeted subjects. Or again, based on the literature, some of the colleagues, they were also involved in this project. In their earlier studies, they found salary uplifts for early career maths, physics teachers, reduced attrition by 23%. So there's already some kind of hard data evidence. And if you look at the United States, the studies from there show similar patterns. Financial incentives improve retention in shortage subjects, so that could be effective in terms of tackling. Is there any question or? All right. So nonetheless, the evidence is mixed when we look at the systematic review. It often finds these outcomes are actually inconclusive despite their promise. So this was kind of our anchor. We believe that there is some sort of evidence in the literature. The salary is an obvious one, but is it really enough on its own? Or what we really would like to know, parametrically speaking, to what extent the salary increase could be compensated through other improvements in different areas. Or at least it's very useful from a policy point of view to know how much salary, would be equivalent of improving certain other certain things in teachers, like the daily work stuff. So in addition to salary one, based on what I described, so workload was another phenomenon the scholars they focused on. So we know that over half of teachers in England, they report having an unmanageable workload. And based on correlational studies, a majority of these studies, I'm summarizing the literature, by the way, they're correlational. There's only one experiment conducted back in 2021 by Birch and colleagues. Um, so our results, there are certain overlaps I'm going to mention, but basically, even in that study, there are certain issues in terms of causal effects. I'm going to address those issues in this study as well. But based on those existing correlational research, and we know that there's no strong relationship between workload and turnover, job satisfaction. But high workload satisfaction also correlated with higher intent to stay. So there's lots of confounding within this correlation research. We really don't know. So based on the literature, I may say the evidence is still a little bit mixed in terms of the effect of workload on teacher retention. And so this item came to our life or research agenda probably after pandemic more because flexible working things um, became more prevalent in so many different occupational groups. And indirectly, that kind of motivations came to teaching jobs as well. So teachers, in fact, value flexibility, but it's still hard to implement. And you're going to see in our results as well. Some of them, they think like this is a kind of fantasy. They don't really believe it's feasibility, even though they really would like to have some flexible working schemes. And if you look at competing sectors, they obviously offer more remote work, especially post-COVID, as I said. And in terms of data, what we know is a fewer basically fraction of teachers can take some PPA offsite, or they could have some start late or finish early times, or they would take some ad hoc personal days. So it's actually quite rare to have this perks or flexible working things. In terms of professional development, again, meta-analysis shows there is only a limited link between professional development and retention. And some discrete choice studies that already show teachers value professional development, but quite modestly. In other words, school leaders value professional development more than classroom teachers. And I guess that's always the case. If you look at if you ask head of departments, for instance, at universities as well, they would probably come up with lots of professional development plans for their own staff. But if you ask staff, they would already complain about their own workload level. They will say, yeah, and in an ideal world, we should keep learning and learning in terms of professional development as well. But there is a strong trade-off between professional development and your workload. Therefore, teachers prefer autonomy in choosing what type of professional development options they could have. And the other item is policy and leadership. And this actually comes up quite a lot in interviews as well with teachers. So basically, workload and policy changes are top reasons teachers considering leaving. And therefore, some other things such as collegiality or fair workload, they're also linked to positive school culture, where teachers appreciate. Um, so yeah, basically, even though correlational studies, they don't show very strong link between workloads or policy changes and teacher retention or their decision to leave, they also cite these reasons at the top of the list when they consider leaving. So that already implies there must be some sort of confounding factor in the studies why we're not really able to see very strong effect. And in this study, basically, our aim is trying to disentangle causal effects of all these factors I'm talking about so that we could see their relative contribution to each other in making this decision to leave or stay. So obviously, what other factors would be? People behavior is one of those, is a major concern. If you recently watched Adolescence, is one of the things nowadays everyone talk about. So teacher would require, for instance, according to Birch conjoint analysis, earlier conjoint analysis study, according to their calculations, teacher would require 40% pay rise to tolerate disruptive behavior in a classroom. So, they would be okay to be, yeah, I guess the trade-off is quite high, whatever they are paid, 40% pay rise is obviously quite unrealistic. That already shows us there should be some other cautious, yeah, there must some other kind of the plans the government should probably tackle this disruptive behavior in the classrooms. And discipline enforcement valued more than salary or class size. This is an interesting one. So the teachers, they actually prefer more discipline enforcement in classes than the salary or class increase, sorry, size. And small class sizes matter, but rank lower than support staff access. And in the results, I'm also going to show that small class size matters based on whether teachers work in a state school or private school as well. So there is some heterogeneity in that as well. And the childcare subsidies are highly valued, as you can imagine, especially among parents. They can fully substitute for equivalent salary increases. So all these factors, I try to summarize. It took us to this research question, specific research question: which working conditions or benefits do teachers find most attractive in job advertisements? You may ask, why job advertisements? Because job advertisements play a crucial role in attracting teachers to schools. The majority of job roles are found through advertisements on websites, email lists, or publications. This doesn't mean that the teachers don't find these jobs through individual networks. Obviously, there must be some heterogeneity, but based on data, we know that this is the most common area where teachers look for jobs. So, is there any question, or can I quickly jump in research design? And how am I doing with the time? I guess I got 15 minutes more. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
All
right.
right, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, so this is a very big experimental study. We conducted by basically 5 pre-registered, fully randomized pair conjoined experiments with a sample of 6,666 teachers in England. And the number of individuals in this experiment was almost 30,000 people, because some of them, they took this experiments multiple times. And then the total number of observations we have almost 150,000. And the reason why we have this large N, because they basically take 3 tasks in each experiments, and they got 2 data points to make a decision. So that increases the overall N quite high. Okay. And the experiments, they are designed based on a fictional scenario in which teachers asked to imagine seeking employment at a new school due to a recent moving to a new neighborhood. Why we decided to come up with this particular case, just to avoid some confounding issues within their current setting. Because if we ask, like, okay, so these are the school profile, job profiles, which job you would prefer to apply, they would be more likely to think that a decision in their current neighborhood, because obviously they will have not n number of choices, but they will have n minus x number of choices, which will be confounded based on where they reside. To avoid that, you basically ask them, imagine you move to a new neighborhood, and then you're seeking employment at a new school. And in each experiment, teachers are shown 2 hypothetical job ads in a stacked way, on top of each other, with 4 job attributes whose levels vary randomly across job profiles. I'm going to show an example. And over 3 rounds, teachers evaluate randomized paired advertisements and select the job advert they prefer the most. And we conducted focus groups as well before designing the experiment by hosting a series of 6 teacher focus groups, each of around 12 teachers, in total 72, to aid us to develop attributes, their levels, and wordings more effectively, so that teachers would actually understand what we are trying to manipulate. So in that way, it was also a bit data driven. So this was an example of the task. For instance, teachers, they saw on that app daily basis, they take some questions. So as you see, like after they read the blurb of the case, when they move in a new neighborhood, etc., which job advert do they prefer? So they seen like this 2 options where job offering, and you see like they got like the 4 different indicators. We are trying to randomly vary the options, okay? And once they choose, they can go to another job advert, and they'll do this 3 times. And each time, all these levels of the attributes, right? Job attribute levels across the stacks, it will be randomly varied. So this is how we establish causality, basically, in that case. So for instance, in the first experiment, they got 4 attributes. And in each experiment, salary is always there as an attribute, because we always would like to see how they make that trade-off based on salary as well. So they got each attribute, they have maximum levels of 3 or minimum 2. The salary one, for instance, there are 3 levels. The job could be, the salary level could be same as current job, could be 5% higher, could be 10% higher. And for flexible working, the baseline, again, requested considered within statutory frameworks, and then it improves in a monotonic way. And there's an healthcare attribute. The baseline is just staff well-being supported, and then there is some tangible increase. And same applies to other attributes such as collegiality. And in the second experiment, on top of, again, salary attributes, personal flexibility, childcare, CPT, continuing professional development, and PPA time. So this 10% basically comes from the existing baseline, and then 20% and 30% again is an increase. The workload, leadership, class sizes, and finally, pupil behavior. Okay, all of these levels of attributes in each job profiles, they are basically randomly varied across tasks. So the participant recruitment, well, basically this conducted last October and November. Participants had to open the app twice. And so this survey is sent to all non-head teacher panelists, because we have a different experiment for head teachers. And the analysis, the sample is restricted to classroom teachers, or middle leaders, we call it, and currently working in a school in England, okay? So this sample, basically the largest teacher survey platform in England, Teachers Tab. And there are roughly 10,000 teachers daily basis from state and private sectors. They take studies. You just need to download the app, and then you need to verify your school credentials, and then you receive those tasks or the surveys basically daily at 3:30. It's not a random sample, it's a convenience sample, but in fact, we are very confident to use a sample rather than a random sample. The main reason, so not basically teacher survey achieves actually full randomization because they got very low response rate, around 10%. Okay. So I'm going to summarize the estimation strategy a little bit faster, just because I know that probably the audience would appreciate more findings than this. But as an estimation strategy, we basically use an OLS model because the type of randomization we use actually ensures enough variation in the model. And the model specification basically requires the standard errors clustered at respondent level as well. And in terms of estimates, what we're going to talk about here, mainly average marginal component effects, which represents actually every change in probability of choosing a job when switching an attribute level, and marginal means. And this slide probably would just clarify the questions in your mind if you're not familiar with this estimates. This AMC's average marginal component effect actually is the causal effect of changing an attribute level relative to baseline. And marginal means, we also look at marginal means. They are absolute probability of choosing a job with a given attribute level. The difference between marginal means and the AMCs, marginal means basically they are the pure effects without relying any reference level. Okay. And we also look at some heterogeneous effects. I'm going to discuss those conditional effects later if I have time, but let me just delve into this initial results. Okay, so the first plot at the top, it basically shows the marginal effects. You can actually see that the salary level, the first attribute, so 10% increase in salaries, it already derives a massive effect. Okay, so that means that almost 67, I guess, as far as I remember, 67 time of the time, sorry, 67% of the time, Teachers, they prefer jobs where there's a 10% increase in their salary. And the second competing one, as you can see, the healthcare. But in terms of summarizing all the findings, because in this presentation format, I believe it might be quite overwhelming to read this graph. So I'm just going to present all these key findings in verbal terms. So what this experiment's results show in the first deck, 10% salary increase, basically 34 percentage points in jobs choices. Okay, so it increases the probability of choosing that job by 34 percentage points. It's quite huge. But if you look at free healthcare, given free healthcare, it increases by 28 percentage points too. And flexible working, it increases to a certain extent, but its effect is quite modest. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. So
Sure.
these are components. They're independent of each other, or in addition to the first one.
These are independent from each other. Yeah. And if you look at the second graph here, what we are trying to see, how this effects would change depending on the salary attribute. In fact, you can see that if you look at same as current job, if their salary is the same, majority of these attributes, all of them, they are disfavored. Okay, so that means non-financial benefits are disfavored in the combination of these other attributes. And in each experiment, we also ask an open-ended questions to respondents. So once they choose their job profile, they will also ask, so what were the things you made your decision based on? And analyzing that qualitative data, we actually seen some narratives quite overlapping with the quantitative results, such as teachers preferred concrete offers over vague well-being claims. Like, for instance, one participant said, I seem to prefer the ones with tangible benefits rather than vague claims. And those with existing health conditions found benefits especially valuable. For instance, there were some participants, they said that they declared that they got some conditions and they really appreciate these free healthcare options. Or teachers value flexibility to support obviously childcare or elder care needs. But they were skeptical about feasibility in schools fairly, and that skepticism affects their decisions as well. And in terms of protected co-planning time, they believe that it lowers stress, so that's why they really, really appreciate time with college to plan. They believe it massively lowers stress and workload. So the second experiment, we basically use again the salary attributes here as fixed attribute, and then other free and new three attributes such as personal flexibility, childcare, and continuing professional development. And again, key findings based on this results. So again, salary attribute keeps dominating the fact. For instance, 10% increase in their current salary leads to 40 percentage points in job choice. And it's clearly the most influential factor in decision making, okay? If you look at the CPD, for instance, 6 days a year CPD offer, it increases only 10%, and 40% of on-site nursery, it increases only 11%, so on and so forth. And I'm going to show some heterogeneous results in terms of this on-site nursery offering. Obviously, if you have a kid, you would expect that this 11% would go up parametrically, okay? And some similar qualitative findings based on that, what we found in terms of childcare provision, in fact, is highly valued by teachers with young children and is seen as crucial to retaining female staff, because some of people, they already cited too many talented female teachers dropping back due to childcare costs. And they are the ones, for instance, they cited the sacrifice in the households, in teacher households. And some without children felt excluded or frustrated. There are mixed views about CPD, the effect of CPD. Some support when teacher they can choose, but again, there's a skepticism towards generic offers, such as they believe that this could be a kind of bait for teachers. The schools they offer just to tick the box but its effect is kind of low. And in an experiment three, so in addition to salary, we brought PPA time, PPA working location, and workload. And this is an interesting DAC. The main reason PPA effect dominated salary. So in short, we could say that people value PPA time more than salary. So if you look at the results in detail, you could see that 30% PPA time increase led to 38 percentage point job preference. Definitely more value than a 10% salary increase. It was only 22 percentage points. Okay. And if you just increase 20% PPA time, the effect itself was almost equivalent of 10% increase in salary. Okay. And in terms of workload, significant workload reductions can outweigh salary gains. This is what we concluded based on this results. And again, 30% PPA time remains attractive even without a salary boost if you look at this particular part of the graph, right? So the PPA time within the same as current job option is still favored. What does it mean? It simply means it indicates strong preference for protected time and task support, and it actually suggests potential for non-financial retention strategies. Okay. And some of the qualitative findings, again, quite overlaps. But as I said at the beginning of the presentation, some people believe that this idea of 30 hours per week is great, but they believe it sounds like a fantasy. They don't really believe this can be actually accommodated by government or some schools. In terms of PPA time preferences, is widely viewed as more important than salary. And this is not surprising because if you look at other studies in terms of flexible working in different areas of labor economics, for instance, you see that like the people, they started valuing more and more their time over some pay increase. So the fourth one, the final experiment in this. So we also brought the leadership, class size, and behavior issues, people behavior issues. We also found class size matters. In fact, the class size smaller than 22 students is almost equivalent to 10% salary increase. That means it's nearly equal in attractiveness. In terms of leadership and behavior, they are weaker drivers. Yeah, they're important, but they're not very persuasive than concrete workload reductions. I guess that also takes us to point, people, teachers can be tolerant towards this disruptive behavior if other conditions are improved. Just for brevity and time reasons, I'm just going to talk about this robustness check. So as a fifth experiment, what we did, because there might be an argument saying that, well, the combinations of these attributes, they may change the effect size or the direction of the effects. So what we did, we basically put all this most performing attributes together in one DAC, which was salary level, class size, healthcare, and PPA time. And we just ran this experiment one more time with this high effect, the attributes, and the results were consistent. Okay, it basically suggests preferences are stable, not driven by job advert combinations. And this gives us some methodological reassurance, obviously. The results support internal validity of the experiment, and it confirms interpretability and reliability of the stated preferences by teachers. What are the key takeaways based on this final fifth experiment? The preferences for individual features remain strong and meaningful, and the job choice decisions not overly dependent on specific combinations of attributes, but the attributes themselves in the universe of other attributes. Very quick treatment heterogeneity I could walk through, Mubarak, or if you prefer, I jump to conclusion and I collect some questions and I reflect this treatment heterogeneity throughout the Q&A. I'm also happy. What would you prefer?
Yeah, I think probably combining
Conclusion
it
then.
with Q&A would be
All
good,
right,
no?
great.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that should be fine. So there are several key takeaways from this project we could have. I mean, the first and obvious one, teachers most value concrete offers, such as greater protected PPA time, smaller class sizes, and free healthcare when mentioned in job adverts. This had effects comparable to a 10% salary increase. And the main reasons why we use percentage type increase rather than an actual uh, number, like such as £10,000 increase, etc. Because Birch and colleagues, the earlier experimental study, they actually use a specific number. We wanted to avoid that increase relative to a salary baseline of that person because we know that, and we actually found in the treatment heterogeneity, if someone is a very senior teacher, let's say a head teacher earns 90K or whatever, obviously £10,000 is not as much as is not as is not as big increase for someone who earns 30K. And the second takeaway, the many popular job attributes are expensive to provide. And in some cases, schools will achieve better recruitment outcomes by increasing salary instead. This is our policy suggestion based on this results. Nonetheless, healthcare offers, childcare subsidies, flexible working commitments, they all stand out as both better value for money and more likely to influence application decisions for many teachers. And to what extent they're practical to implement, obviously, is more of a deep conversation topic, I guess. And the final takeaway: the phase differences matter. The For the treatment effect heterogeneity part, what we found, primary teachers actually value block time and offsite PPA and collaboration opportunities, and secondary teachers, they prioritize the total amount of PPA. So there are certain nuances between and the teachers at different phase levels. Okay. Yeah. I think that's probably a quick summary of this project. I'm happy to answer any question you have or reflection or criticisms. I really appreciate. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity.